Okay, hopefully you can hear me now online. All right. So as I mentioned, right as I was getting married to my wife, we found out she had cancer. At the time, we didn't know it was stage 3 melanoma, it was skin cancer. So she was down at Huntsman Cancer Institute, and we went on our honeymoon. We got married, went on our honeymoon, and while we were on our honeymoon, Huntsman called us and said, when you get back, we got to get you in for surgery to take out your lymph nodes to see how far the cancer is spread. Terrible news to hear on your honeymoon, right? So we were walking down the beach that night, and I'm sad. We're just starting out our life. We don't know what this means. And as we're walking down the beach, my wife sees a sign that says "Swim with the Dolphins." And she lights up. She said, "I've always wanted to swim with the dolphins." So I said, "Okay, you're going to swim with the dolphins." And we go up to pay for it. I believe it was $250. And I remember because I had like $200 in my account at the time. And I remember swiping the card, just praying, "Please go through." And it did. It went through. She swam with the dolphins. She was happy, as you can see. Well, we come home and we fly home from our honeymoon the next day, and I have negative account balance in my checking. No money in my name. And then I go to work for my first day on the job, and when I show up at the bank, there's somebody else sitting in the office. And I go into the office, I say, "Hey, I'm here for my first day." And they get this kind of sick look on their face, and they say, "Didn't you get our messages?" "What messages?" And they said, "They actually hired me for the position while you were gone." So I didn't have a job. This is before Obamacare. We didn't have insurance. And at that moment, my wife was at Huntsman getting treatment, very expensive treatment. So I went home that night, and the next slide, if you can go to the next slide, I stayed up all night long, and I wrote down 100 ideas on how to make money. This was a desperation. I pulled it out last night. This is the notebook where I wrote the ideas down. It was a desperation. I need to make money very quickly. How can I do it? And so some of the ideas I laugh about, like the very top idea is a popcorn machine that would butter the popcorn. So you can imagine like a waterfall of butter, and the popcorn shoots through the waterfall of butter. And it sounded great, but it would be very gross. Each individually buttered popcorn kernels would be very gross. But one of the ideas that I was reading last night says a delivery business where we would buy stuff and deliver it to people's houses. I remember it's like 2004. So it was Amazon, but obviously I didn't start Amazon. So I'm writing down all these business ideas. And amongst the 100 ideas that I wrote down, I narrowed it down to like 2 or 3 that I thought were actually viable business. So I call this the idea generation stage. And this is what most entrepreneurs will do. You write down 100 ideas and you narrow it down to 2 or 3 that are actually maybe functional ideas for you to vet out. And so then if you go to the next slide, I chose one of those ideas, which was I had sat through a training course about a month earlier. And I had paid $75 to go to this training course. And I remember sitting in a room, there was about 20 people in the room, and I remember the whole time thinking, this guy is terrible. He was a terrible instructor, the class was awful, and I looked around the room and thought, he's making $1,000 to teach this class. Why don't I teach these classes? And so that was one of the ideas I came up with is, I looked around and thought, what are all the different certifications and permits and training classes? These aren't college degrees, but they're workforce certificates. What can I teach and get certified to teach? So we're talking food handler's permit, forklift operator stuff, that type of certifications. And so I went out and I started getting certified to teach these different training classes. And one of them, which ended up being the one that was the most profitable, was in the firearm world. So it was specifically concealed firearm permits or license to carry type classes. And this was 2006. And politically, there was a lot of stuff going on in that time frame. And so firearms were a very popular topic. And so that ended up being one of the brands that was the most popular brand. So that particular brand was a company called Legal Heat. And I launched that company in 2006. Now, when I say I launched it, I had $200 was the budget that I set aside to start the business. So To start the business, what I did is I taught a single class. After I got certified, I taught a single class in my house, which was a townhouse, my kitchen table. My best friend came. There was a college professor from Weber State that came, and then my mom. And my mom paid double, so it was like I taught 4 people. And so from that class, I made $300, $75 each. I took that $300 and I went on KSL and I bought a used projector. Massive, this thing was this big. And I bought it, and then the next class I taught, I had like 6 people in it. And so then I used the projector and I started what we call bootstrapping the business. So as I was making money, I was reinvesting the money into the business. But bootstrapping is a very slow process. So the first month I bought the projector, the next month I bought some business cards, then I bought some flyers, and I was literally going around on telephone poles hanging up flyers. I was going into grocery stores on their bulletin boards and hanging up flyers. Very much bootstrapping it. About 4 months into the business, I built our first website. It was on a system called Google Pages, which is different than what Google Pages is today, but it used to be a website builder. And I designed our logo, the whole shebang, everything I was learning as I was doing it. After about a year in operation, my brother, Jason, was helping me run the business. And yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. After about a year in operation, we had grown, and I would say that first year, maybe I made $10,000 teaching the classes. The second year in operation, we started getting a reputation as being a little bit more professional and a little bit better training class than what our competition was. And this is something I'm going to talk about at the end when I talk about lessons I learned. But a big lesson I learned is being a bigger fish in a smaller pond. Talk about what that means. But the industry I was operating in was not very sophisticated. The other people that were teaching these training courses were not sophisticated. So it was pretty easy for us to quickly rise up and get a reputation in that niche for being more professional and better. Well, what we started doing is we started working with local retailers. We didn't have any money to advertise. And so what we did is we went to different retailers, Sportsman's Warehouse, Cal Ranch, and retailers that had a mutual interest in our business. What we went to them and proposed is, hey, we will teach these training classes in your store. And what that does is it brings potential customers into your store. In exchange for us teaching them in your store, you will offer us a place to teach and help us advertise the classes. So they allowed us to put posters up inside their store. That was the first agreement that we reached. And these were just with individual retailers. So Cal Ranch store in Far West, Utah, Sportsman's Warehouse store in Twin Falls, Idaho. Just kind of regionally here we started teaching. So at the end of our second year in operation, we were operating in about 10 stores, and we were doing these monthly events, and we were making some money. I would say year 2, I made maybe $30,000 on the business. Now I was a college student, so it was enough to pay the bills. It was enough to get by. We weren't rich by any means, but it was enough to pay the bills. And then year 3, our business started to take off quite a bit. What happened is the retailers started talking to each other and saying, oh, we have these events every month. They're good events. They bring people into the store. Why don't you offer them as well? So we started to get a reputation amongst these individual retail stores, and more stores started asking us to come teach training classes. And what we saw is we had, and this slide's a little small here, but this was how we did our scheduling. This was how sophisticated we were. But we had like 30 retail stores that wanted us to teach classes. It was only me and my brother teaching them. So we had to schedule out when we could teach them. And that was how we did it. We actually put masking tape on a whiteboard with the location name and then wrote in the dates that we were going to teach. But the business actually started growing. This was our first office that we ever had. This is the whiteboard that's in the back of the office. I paid $100 a month for it. You couldn't open the door all the way if somebody was sitting in front of the desk. So I couldn't have people sit in front of my desk. They had to sit on the side here. But I remember sitting in that office and thinking, I've made it. This is a big deal. And that feeling, if you've never started a business, that feeling of I've created something that is bearing fruit is an awesome feeling. So I remember sitting in that office year 3, maybe year 4, thinking, wow, we've made it. Well, then I went to law school. I graduated with my bachelor's degree and I went to law school, and I continued to run the business during law school. Now, the next stage, 2006 through 2009, if you can go to the next slide there, this was the work stage. So when I say bootstrapping stage, at that time I was a full-time law student. Now, if you're not familiar with law school, when you start law school, you actually have to sign a contract with the college that you won't have a job. And the reason is you're expected to study 15 hours. You have the law school studying, and so they say you wouldn't be able to have a job and do law school. What I was doing is I went to law school. I would go to school Monday through Wednesday, and then Wednesday afternoon I would drive to Spokane, Washington, and I would catch a red-eye flight, and I would fly to some of the states. At this stage, we were operating in about 17 states, so I would fly to Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Illinois, and I would teach a series of classes Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then fly home Sunday. And then I would go to my law school classes Monday through Wednesday. So I was skipping about half of my law school classes. I did that about 40 weeks a year. So I was gone the vast majority of weekends. And this is an idea of how glamorous that was. So I mentioned I would drive from city to city and teach these training classes. If you can't see what's happened here, I have 70 folding chairs in a car. And so I'm driving, not recommending this to anybody, but I'm driving down the freeway in like a Honda Civic with 70 folding chairs in the car. And I would drive from city to city, and I would show up with the chairs because it was cheaper if I brought the chairs with me than if I rented them at each individual city. So I would travel around in the cheapest rental car I could rent, and I would teach, and I slept in the rental car quite a bit. I mean, I remember sleeping in Motel 8 parking lots in the rental car with 70 folding chairs.
Did you ever get pulled over and they asked you?
No, I never did. I'm sure it would have been bad, but that was. Now understand, this wasn't like, oh, one trip. This was 2 years of nonstop doing this.
You're transporting folding chairs across state lines.
And how you engineer to fit 70 chairs. I challenge you to do that. Try and fit 70 chairs in your car.
What's your wife jealous?
Yeah, great question. And she asked about my wife. We had a kid at this time. During this time, we had a kid, and I'm going to talk to you about lessons that I learned. But one of the reasons I ended up selling my company was because that lifestyle is not very sustainable for my family. So, anyways, I'm going through and teaching these classes, and my brother's doing the same thing. And to be very candid with you, we were making a ton of money. So I would come home with a carry-on suitcase with $70,000 in cash at the end of these weeks. And TSA would give me weird looks as I'd go through the airport security with the all in $20 bills, but it's legal as long as you're flying domestically in the United States. And so I would come home, and we were growing this business, but it was growing at a pace that was quicker than we knew how to grow it. And so what ended up happening is, and I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. Do go one more slide down. So during this time, we started looking and thinking, okay, teaching these classes is not sustainable just for me and my brother to fly around the country every weekend and teach the classes. So what are some ways we can innovate in our industry to make money without requiring us to fly all over the country? So one of the things I did is in 2000, and I believe it was 2011, is I launched my first mobile phone application. It was an iPhone app, and what it was is, in the industry I was operating in, it was all 50 states gun laws. So from state to state, there's different firearm laws, restrictions, rules, and so we put that all into an app format, and when the iPhone 1 was released, we released our app with it, and it did very well. So the app was continually in the top 10 in the reference category. That app during my college years made me between $2,000 to $8,000 a month just in app sales. And again, this was information that I already had because I was designing these training courses and I knew what the laws were from state to state. I just took it and put it into a platform that would be able to be sold. So again, the best innovations often come from people who are working in an industry and see where there are what we call pain points, or points where there are gaps that a consumer needs help with. And so I launched the app in 2009. I also published it in a traditional book format. I still do that today. I write 2 different books on firearm laws annually that we publish. And in the beginning, I was just selling those books. I was self-publishing and selling them in my training classes as an add-on to the class. And now they're published and sold nationwide through tailors, warehouse, and those books have sold about 75,000 hard copies. The app itself has about 400,000 active users. It's been a great brand recognition tool. I remember the first time I was walking through an airport in Wisconsin, and somebody stopped me in the airport and said, "Hey, do you work for Legal Heat? I have that app on my phone." This is 2012. And I remember thinking like, whoa, somebody in a different state knows my brand. That was when we first started getting brand equity. People started recognizing it. And the mobile phone app, to a large degree, helped with that. So then, if you'll go down to the next slide, about 2010 to 2014 is when we started kind of reaping the rewards. And these were an example of what the classes that we would put on looked like. And that was not an exceptional class. That was teaching one of those on Thursday, 2 of them on Friday, 2 of them on Saturday. And we were doing that at the time in about a dozen states. It was doing very well. The company was very profitable. You know, to make $1 million a year, you know how much you have to make daily? How much that equates to per day? You know, I better do the math because I think I know, but I do this with my students all the time, because you think, well, I want to make $1 million a year. That's $2,700 a day, 365 days a year. So to get to $1 million in revenue, it's not as easy as it sounds. And so when you hear that a company's reached $1 million in revenue, that means Sunday they're doing $2,700, Monday they're doing $2,700, and if on Monday they only make $2,000, then they got to make that $700 extra up the next day, and you've got to keep that pace. So to get to $1 million, especially in a service industry, is very, very difficult. And by the time we had got to 2014, which is the next slide, please, we were doing about $2 million annually revenue. And again, in the service industry, that's very difficult. And we were operating in 17 states. We had about 57 retail stores. But it was me, my brother, and then we'd hired 1 employee. So we were flying and teaching. So we hadn't scaled the business. And it was very difficult for us to see how to scale the business at that stage.
You still have the $100 off?
Yeah, no, actually, that's a great question. I didn't get the $100 office until after I graduated from law school, and we were doing over $1 million in revenue by the time I got the $100 office. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is avoiding debt when possible. I was we never took on a penny of debt in the business. I'm very worried about that. Number one reason businesses fail is undercapitalization. They don't have enough money to pay their bills when something happens. In our case, we didn't have any bills other than the $100 a month office, and so we could swing that $1 million. I felt okay about that, but and in a real way, we were very risk averse in that sense. So at that stage in 2014, we were approached by a group of investors. And the investors said, "Hey, look, we've been looking at your business and you're doing very well. Our profit margins were about 75%, which is massive profit margin on our customer acquisition cost was very low. We were still advertising through the retailers for free, essentially. And so they really liked the business model, and they came to us and said, we can take it to the next level." And so if you go to the next slide, please. In 2015, late 2014, we were approached by a group of investors that purchased the business. And that was an interesting process because I'd never thought about selling the business. I hadn't started the business with the thought of one day selling it. And that's what ended up happening. Now, had I known from the beginning that I was going to end up selling the business, I would have been much more careful with how I did our books, our bookkeeping, everything, because when you're selling a business, they analyze financials from the very beginning. In the beginning, this was a hobby business. And so what ended up happening is because our books weren't perfectly in order, the valuation of the business was decreased by quite a bit because we couldn't show the year-over-year growth that we actually had. We knew how much we'd grown. We were growing 200, 300% a year, which is massive, but we couldn't show that because our books were. So we sold the business. It went very well. It was fine. We got some attention for it. And then what happened is after about 3 months, this venture capital group tried to run the business. And after about 3 months, they called me and said, hey, we'd like to hire you to run the business. So I ended up going back to work for the group that purchased the business and running operations for them. And I helped them do that from 2015 until 2021. And during that time, they grew the business to all those locations. See on the map, currently operations in 43 states, 300 some odd locations, doing about 300 classes a month and annually training 65,000, 70,000 students a year. They've scaled the business significantly. And this is something that I mentioned. Big fish, small pond. You need to know where you are in the hierarchy of businesses. You might not be Elon Musk. Right? Elon Musk might have the ability to scale a business bigger than you can. And so knowing when it's time to work with groups, the group that I was working with had funds and knowledge and access to resources to scale the business significantly faster than I ever would. So that was part of the deal in selling it. So we sold it. I helped run operations, during which time we've grown it significantly. Then, just at the end of 2020, we were acquired again by a larger firm. If you'll go to the next slide. And that acquisition is going to put rocket fuel on business. So the new company is then once again retained to help run operations. And what I'm seeing now is just the snowball effect of the business now is going to go to places that it never could have under my operation. But I've been able to be in the business and helping run the business and grow it. And so it's been a great experience, and I've been exposed to things I otherwise never would have been exposed to had I not sold. So that gets us to lessons learned. So here, as I sat down last night and thought, okay, what are some things that I would tell me? I was at your exact stage most of my first or second year of college. I was broke. I mean, I was real broke, like negative bank account, cancer bills. So what are some things that I would go back and tell myself? Well, the first thing is start a business today, literally by tonight when you go to bed. Entrepreneurship rates in the United States are at a 40-year low, which is interesting. And I asked my students in my class why that is. Why was your grandpa and grandma more likely to start a business in 1970 than they were today? Per capita, entrepreneurship rates were 20% higher in 1970 than they are. And the number one reason I get from my students why they're less likely to start a business is because all the ideas have been taken. To a degree, that's true. In 1970, if you wanted to start a business, you looked around your community, saw what wasn't in your community, and started that business. So you could start a grocery store if there wasn't a grocery store. Well, today, you'd have to be out of your mind to start a grocery store. Not going to compete with Amazon and Walmart. So to a degree, that's true. The counterpoint I make to that is new industries and fields have opened up in the last decade that didn't exist previous. So think about, I mentioned my app, right? Think about how much money has been made from apps. Apps did not exist a decade ago. 11, 12 years ago, the apps, that word didn't even make sense if somebody told it. So that was a whole new industry that opened up opportunities. New trends coming down the road. Look at what blockchain is going to do. Look at what Web3 technology is going to do. So if I were in college, I'd start a business today, and you will not know what you're doing. You'll stumble through it. I look back at that first class I taught at my kitchen table to my mom and a friend. it makes me cringe so much thinking about what I taught, like how I think I was reading from papers that I printed off the internet the whole time. It was awful. But if you wait until you've got perfected product, then what you do is you leave time for competition to perfect their product in the marketplace. So you get out there, you look like an idiot, your business stumbles its way through, but what you figure out is over years, you figure out, oh, now I understand this industry better than anybody else. The only way you get that exposure is by actually getting in the industry. So starting a business today is what I would do. Second is pay attention to pain points in your daily life. So those are business ideas. What I mean by pain points is when I sat down and wrote down 100 business ideas, it was the first one that came to my mind is the experience I'd had sitting in that training class with that terrible instructor. And it was painful for me to sit through that class. And yet I was paying money for it. So when you experience that in your daily life, you can't find something, you think, why is this so difficult to find? That's a business opportunity. Doesn't mean it's the right opportunity for you, but it's a business opportunity. So pay attention to those pain points because that's often the best place to see opportunities. The third point is big fish, small pond. What I mean by that is know who you are. You know, it's very unlikely that you are Jeff Bezos. Right? It's very unlikely that you're Elon Musk, and that's not an insult. I bet if you saw Jeff Bezos's life and you were actually exposed to his life, you wouldn't want to be Jeff Bezos. I read with my kids every night for an hour. I coach all their basketball teams. I love that. I don't think Jeff Bezos did that growing up. I'm judging the man, I just doubt that that's what his lifestyle was. So my point is know who you are. And if you're somebody who's starting a business because you want the lifestyle of it, then know what you're getting yourself into, and you're going to have much more success in smaller ponds than you will in bigger ponds. So don't go head to head with Lululemon and Nike, clothing business, right? Yeah, that's a hyper-competitive industry. You've got to be willing to really make some sacrifices. If I were to rank my most successful friends, at the top of the list is a friend of mine named Dave, who mows lawns for a living. He's been doing it since he was 17 years old, and he does lawn care and snow removal. Now, the difference is, 46 now, over the course of 17 to 46, he now has 100 some odd people mowing lawns. And it's scaled into this massive empire of a business. He's probably the wealthiest friends, but that's not a sophisticated industry. It's not like competing with Amazon. You could buy a lawnmower and start mowing lawns, not tomorrow, snow, but very quickly you could get into that industry. And here's the thing is, when I say big fish, small pond, that's an unsophisticated industry in terms of business operation. Most landscapers, there are exceptions, but most in his industry aren't doing things like searching. And the way he advertises is flyers and cards. He doesn't even accept credit card payments. You have to pay with a check. And it's a very unsophisticated industry, but he's dominating. So when I say big fish, small pond, I mean find an environment where you can be at the top of the environment, not the lower. Bootstrap as much as possible, avoid debt. I talked about that. Watch for ways to innovate in your industry. The big thing that 2 years ago I launched right before COVID for our business is online training. So we built an entirely custom learning management system, and we took all of our in-person training courses and put them online. Not only did we put them online, we translated them to Spanish, and so available to the 60 million Americans who are first language Spanish speakers. And it opened up brand new markets for us. And then we launched that 2 months before COVID hit. So what that allowed us to do is during COVID, continue to keep our revenues steady. Matter of fact, our best years were during COVID because others in our industry were out of business. Can't have in-person training events in Seattle, Washington during COVID. But we could continue to offer training online because we built those systems. And everybody else tried to scramble to build the systems themselves, but it was too late. They're already in the marketplace. So pay attention to ways to stay on the cutting edge of that type of stuff. And it's, you're not gonna have the money when you start, but you do it yourself. I built our first website. Didn't know how to build apps or do anything like that, but you struggle through and you do it. Become a subject matter expert in your field. As you're working in an industry, become and establish yourself as an expert in that industry. So whatever you need to do in terms of getting the proper credentials, getting the proper recognition. So a big part of what I do now is I go around and speak at conferences, speak at events. What that's done is I now get opportunities because people have recognized me as an expert in this industry, specifically like the firearm law industry. I get calls every single day about opportunities. Some of them I don't want, some of them I want, but they're opportunities nonetheless. So the more you can expose yourself to different groups, getting accolades, getting credentials, over time, that'll start reaping quite a bit of reward. Synergize is the next one. And what I mean by that is the biggest thing we ever did for our business was go work with the retailers and have them do the advertising for it. They didn't ask for anything in return. We paid them $0. And yet we were able to use their massive customer base for free advertising because we offered them a benefit. So find ways in your business and your niche where you can offer a benefit to somebody else that can help you. Scratch your back, you scratch mine. And that can be tremendously helpful. Multiple eggs, multiple baskets. What I mean by that is I've never had all my eggs in one basket. Even when I was running that business, I had 2 other businesses that I was running. You'll hear people say the exact opposite. So Mark Cuban, for example, one of the things he will always say is you're either all in or you're out. So I'm not saying this is the only way to operate, but my life motto has never been, I've got everything in one business. So while I'm running this business, even if it's successful, I've got 2 or 3 other things that I'm working on. So if this one fails, there's something else. That's my risk tolerance. Maybe you have a better risk tolerance. Mark Cuban has a higher risk tolerance than I do. So he's an all-in person, which he's not. He's got like 40 businesses. But he likes to say he's an all-in business person, and that's great. So sometimes you'll be that way. I'm not that way. And then finally, the last thing, and I think this might be the most important, is diversify your life. And what that means is you've heard the expression, jack of all trades, master of none. That's not the quote. The actual quote is, jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. What that means is diversify your skill set. Being very good at one thing and one thing only can work out, but it's insanely risky because the one thing that you're very good at might disappear overnight. You're operating in a world where technology is advancing so quick that you become very good at whatever it may be. A lawyer, law careers 20 years from now are going to look much different. So diversify your skill set. While you're in college, learn how to code, learn how to build apps, learn how to do graphic design. The top 3 things that I struggle with is at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'll be trying to do something for my business, and I don't know how to do the web development for it. I don't know how to do the graphic design. And so I'm watching YouTube videos at 2 in the morning trying to figure out how to use Adobe Illustrator to do this stupid thing because I can't call our graphic designer at 2 in the morning, but it's on my mind and I want to work on it. So if you have those skill sets and it's a diverse skill set, then you can be much more productive. And so if I were back in college, I would be taking classes on functional skills like coding, web development, graphic design, and I would be learning those not to be a subject matter expert in it. I don't need my career to be graphic designer, but to be good enough that I could make a poster myself for my own business. Good enough at web design that I could build my own website and launch it. And then later I can hire other people to perfect it, but I can at least get the initial product, what we call minimum viable product. So diversify your skill set. And then the last thing on that point is that's not just in your education. join clubs, join organizations. You know, I serve on the Legislative Affairs Committee for my county. And if you haven't heard of that, the Chamber of Commerce in your county has different clubs and organizations. So I'm on the Small Business Council, I'm on the Legislative Affairs Committee. And what they are is just each county will review legislation that's coming through. Now, the reason that I'm mentioning this is sitting on that committee with me is like the CEO of a major corporation, the chief marketing officer of another major corporation, and then there's me, right? So what that does for me is it allows me to say, hey, I know Tom from XYZ major corporation. And those things that you do, those relationships you build will pay major dividends. People you get to know. So that is kind of what I thought of as far as lessons learned. And so I think we're right on schedule for questions. So what questions can you've sat through me talking, what questions can I answer? Yeah.
At what time did you realize when you were working on multiple businesses that this was one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Pretty quickly, I saw the potential of it. I don't know when, because your time is limited, right? You're going to have to choose where do you dedicate the most of your time. Pretty early on, I would have said a year and a half, 2 years into operating, I saw the potential of it. What I saw is our competition was just so terrible. They just weren't good. And so I thought, okay, if they're making money, we should be able to dominate this entire industry. So it was pretty early on. But even then, I had an experience when I was in law school. I still got my law degree, right? So this is a key point. Like, I was making a fair amount of money, and I still went through law school, got my law degree. I didn't drop out of law school. When I mentioned multiple eggs, multiple baskets. But I had one experience where it was my end of my second year of law school, and the dean of the law school had called me into his office because I'd been missing classes. You're technically not supposed to miss more than 2 classes per semester. So I had been very creative in how I was missing my classes, trying to fly under the radar. And he called me in and he said, Phil, I remember vividly, this was an old attorney. He'd been on the Supreme Court in Idaho, and he was a well-respected attorney. But he said, Phil, you're never going to succeed. One thing you don't understand, you're never going to be successful if you don't learn to keep the rules. I just remember thinking in my head, I am making so much money. and I had to sit, it took everything in me to not drop out of law school right there. Right? But it was, so when you recognize, well, I don't know if I ever recognized that this is an all-in proposition. So it was, now I was giving it most of my time, but I was still doing other things that would be there in case this thing didn't. So I don't know if I ever, still now. So that's a good question. It's a hard question to answer. Any other questions? Yeah.
Now, you're a very successful business. Why in the world would you?
No, this is good. I love it. So I can tell you the one thing that I know I'm going to do forever is this job. And when I sold the company, I didn't really know what I was going to do. Matter of fact, for like 8 months, I didn't do it. Hung around. My wife was like, "When are you going to go to work? What are you going to do?"
Go away.
Yeah. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I saw Slick was hiring this entrepreneurship and business professor. Wanted somebody to talk business law and entrepreneurship. I thought, that sounds awesome. It's right in my wheelhouse. I taught, right, but they were not in a college environment. I'd never been in academia. And I came and interviewed, and I didn't think I was going to get the job. Matter of fact, if I remember correctly, I didn't get the job. They offered it to somebody else, and then a second position opened, and so then they offered me the job.
Me too, Phil.
Yeah, so I was the second choice, and that's fine. But the reason that I like it is, A, at this institution, almost everybody's the same demographic, in the sense that very few of you have trust funds. Maybe I'm misreading it, but if you're balling out and you're still going to Slick, then that's good. But most of you, you're paying your way through school like I was. I never had scholarship money, parents' money, or anything like that. And so most of my students in the entrepreneurship classes are really actually looking at launching business. It's not some theory that maybe they're interested in, like they're launching the businesses. Today, before my class and after my class, both had students that came in and talked to me about their business ideas. That's why, so yeah, that's why I love it.
So
Go
what
forever.
is the chat, how you advertise?
Okay, good. Now, how do we advertise? If that's, yeah, so if you're asking how we advertise now, it's much different than the way it used to look. Back in the day, I'd never spent a penny on advertising. My first business cards that I mentioned, we had ordered Vistaprint was doing like a coupon, you could get like 200 business cards for free. So that's how I got the business cards. And so I literally, for the first 2 or 3 years, maybe longer, we didn't spend a penny on advertising. After that, we were advertising like print media, like put it in like a newspaper. We would take out like classified ad. Today, we have a $60,000 monthly advertising budget, and of that, 58,000 of it goes Facebook and Google. That is where advertising is at. The benefit of advertising on Facebook is you know whether it's returning investment. Put a billboard up, it's very difficult for you to track if that's turning into money for you. But with Facebook, I can track through not only if you clicked on the ad, but what your demographics are. How old you are, I know your gender, I know your race, I know whether you're married or not. I know everything about you Facebook has analytics for. So what that allows us to do is then refine those ads, market them to the specific demographics. So for example, something that's interesting in the firearm training world, in the last 2 years, 8,200,000 people bought a gun for the first time. Now that will terrify some people through that statistic, right? But if you're in that industry, what that means is these are 8,200,000 brand new customers who have never been in the industry. Of those 8,200,000, 50% of them were women. That is up huge. That's a 30% growth than what used to be. Used to be it was 80% men buying guns, 20%. Now it's 30% growth. So what does that mean? Well, it means when I advertise my business, I have to cater my ads to now a demographic that is much different. 20% were Latin American, Latinos. So that is a massive jump in firearm purchases in that demographic. So that's why when we launched the Spanish training courses and that, we're reaching now new customer segments that we're. So long way to answer a simple question, but it's Facebook. Now, Facebook, if it goes away, it's much harder. We don't see the returns on platforms like Snapchat, TikTok. Our marketing company, we have a marketing company that, matter of fact, it's 2 guys that graduated from the University of Utah just a couple of years ago. And the reason we hired a young marketing company is because they are on TikTok. I hate TikTok. So they're trying to have me do these like 30-second videos. Like they'll send me a script and like, do this 30-second TikTok video, and I cannot make myself do it. And so we've hired that firm, but the return on those investment, we do not get returns. TikTok advertising, Snapchat advertising, it's all Facebook. So the trouble with that is your generation isn't Facebook. As that moves away, it's going to create a big vacuum for advertising. Yeah, so with Facebook, through Facebook, they call it meta advertising. You push out through Instagram. We don't get the return on Instagram. So we do pay-per-click advertising on Facebook, and our Instagram ads don't get the. Now, it's the demographic. Our average student is 35 to 50 years. That's our average customer. They're all on Facebook. So the Instagram generation of younger demographic just isn't quite who is buying our product. But you got to pay attention to that because that shifts. I mean, that's changed very quickly.
So they started this firearm. Do you ever feel like because this is now a successful business, like your hobby,
Yeah.
This, thing.
Yeah, so I wish I could say I started it because that was like my passion. It really wasn't. When I started it, I was a complete fraud. I knew nothing that I was talking about. I started it because it was a business opportunity. Since that time, now it's become more of a passion involved in it more. But no, I wish I could say, and the data says you're most likely to succeed in a business that you've worked in for at least 7 years, the industry you've worked in for at least 7 years. That's the best place for you to start a business because you understand how the whole ecosystem functions. But I wish I could say that for me. It was just, wasn't at all. Now, having said all that, everybody, whatever your hobby is, should be a business. So if you've got a hobby of photography, like you should definitely have a photography business. Tax structure wise and all sorts of reasons why you shouldn't just be paying for your hobbies. Those should all be business expenses. That's a whole topic. So every hobby I have in my life now is business. They're real businesses. The IRS is watching. Yeah, how to turn my kids into a business, is that what you said? So my kids are little entrepreneurs themselves, and I love it. And they talk about starting businesses all the time. And so what I do is I have an LLC for my kids. And for example, every year my son does a booth outside of the home show. People are coming to see the new houses that have been built. And he puts a booth up, and he'll put a whiteboard. He sells drinks and snacks, and he's a cute, 10, 11-year-old. And he puts a sign up that says, "I want to go to summer camp." He doesn't go to summer camp.
Has he ever been to summer camp?
No, but he wants to go, so he's not lying. But he'll have, people come out of the house and pay him $20 for a bottle of water, kind of a thing. So he does very well. But in business law, so if this stuff interests you, we talk about the liability associated with that. If my kid sells somebody something, gets them sick or something happens, it's individual personal liability for me. So I'm not willing to expose my whole life for something my kids do. So in the business law class, we talk about how to structure a business. So my kids actually have an LLC that all their stuff operates in, and it limits the exposure to that. So yeah, it's structuring businesses. That's all stuff that I learned by running it. In the beginning, I had no idea, but it's stuff that now, if you start with that foundation, much